We want to know that good wins. We want to know that evil loses. And so that's why Daniel and the lion's den screams out to us, and our hearts want to say, erupt with an amen. As I was thinking through this passage, the coyote and the roadrunner just came to mind. Again, this is the pastor you got. Okay. But I was thinking to myself that it seems like there's something similar between the two. I think that Daniel 6 has a bit of a coyote and roadrunner vibe. And so I was kicking that around in my mind a little bit. And so I was saying, well, what is it that I liked as a kid? Every morning I would go, I'd eat my breakfast, I'd sit in front of the TV after I got dressed and ready to go to school. I'd watch an episode of Coyote and Roadrunner because I'm a child of the 80s and I didn't have to wait till Saturday for it to come because it was every day of the week. And so that was my version of streaming, young people. That's what mine was. And so I would watch this show every day. And the thing that was so comforting about watching this simple cartoon was that it followed a pattern. I knew how it was going to end. I knew there was going to be a plot. Coyote, eat, roadrunner. There's going to be a complication in there. The roadrunner's too fast. Okay, so what does he need to do? He needs to set a trap. And then after all the dust settles, somehow, always, the roadrunner gets away, right? I hope I haven't ruined this entire series for you, but that's how every one of them ends. And in a certain way, I started to think, if you take that template, that general idea, that pattern, you can actually lay it over this Daniel story. I think there's a rough idea where we see this idea of plot, trap, and deliverance throughout this passage. Let's look first at the plot. It starts to erupt in verses 1 through 5. It pleased Darius to set over the king 120 satraps, to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps could give account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Then the high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful. No error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." So here the plot is hatched, and they realize that there's a complication. For the roadrunner, he's too fast. For Daniel, he's too good. That's the idea. We're going to eat the roadrunner. Oh, we're going to destroy Daniel. Because when a person gets a demotion within a royal setting here in the ancient Near East, this does not mean that you get a pink slip. This means they usually take you out in their equivalent of a pine box. This is going to be a very dangerous thing that happens to Daniel. So this plot takes place, and it's risky. But we can't catch him yet. We have to set a trap. Verses 6 through 15 is the trap. Then these high officials and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, "O King Darius, live forever. All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors, are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and injunction. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, that's important, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he had done previously. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. Then they came near and said before the king concerning the injunction, O king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing stands fast, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked. Then they answered and said before the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. Then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed, and set his mind to deliver Daniel, and he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king, and said to the king, know, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be challenged. So here's the trap. It's risky. They're going to try to place all of their weight on the king. They're going to try to manipulate the king of Persia. But then all of this comes to a head, and then in verse 16, this is when a miracle takes place. All this action just draws to a head. So let's go straight there, remembering that Daniel is a man of integrity, remembering that he's a man of prayer, knowing that he doesn't go about dodging. He does not change who he is. He does not let that happen. Also notice, before we get there to 16, notice in chapter 5, you had this king who thought he was in power, and God took him out of power, right? So he was a powerless king. I made a big deal about that last week. Here you have a powerless king. A king who is powerless to do good. Before he was the king before, King Belshazzar, the king that was a Babylonian king, he was powerless to do the evil that he wanted to do. Now you have a king who is powerless to do the good that he wants to do. You know why? Because God is the hero of the story, not the kings, not Daniel. And we aren't the hero of the story. God is always the hero of the stories. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you. He's sending his servant, his high official, he's sending him with the best blessing that he has. But verse 17. And a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Okay, folks, I'm going to rewind. Remember when Jesus was killed and he was laid in a cave and a stone was rolled over that cave? And then what did Pontius Pilate do? He sealed the stone with his own signet. There is a lot. There's a high correlation, high connection. This is pointing us, even though the author of Daniel doesn't realize it, this is pointing us to Jesus. You're going to see some other ways that there's some connection. So, verse 17 again. And a stone was brought and laid in the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. Then at break of day the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him. And also before you, O king, I have done no harm." Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because, listen for this, he had trusted in his God. That's what you need to know about this passage. This is what the author wants you to do. He wants you to follow and do likewise. He wants you to trust in God. Verse 24. And the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions, they, their children, and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. Now, verses 25 through 28, Darius is going to send out a decree. Essentially, it's going to be a statement of worship. I'll let you read that on your own. It's not much, but I wanted to go back and dial back to verses 22 and 23. Because what is key to understanding this passage is to understand what kind of story this is. This is an ordeal. An ordeal is not driving through Knoxville on volunteer game weekends. Okay, that's not an ordeal. You may think it is, but that's not what an ordeal is. An ordeal is a specific kind of literature or a specific kind of punishment. It's when the authorities think the guy did it, but they don't really know whether he did it or not. And so they go and they throw him in the river. And if he survives, he's innocent. If he drowns, he's guilty. That's what an ordeal is considered. It is a specific type of literature. And so what is being read by a Middle Easterner here, in an ancient world, they would have said, "Oh yeah, of course, this is an ordeal." And yeah, it's an ordeal. You're spending the night with lions. You're not sure you're going to survive. But in verse 22, what Daniel is explaining is that God has counted him as holy, as innocent, would probably be a better way of putting it. My God sent his angels, and they have done me no harm. I was found blameless before him, and also before you. Do you notice where he's placing his concern? Have I sinned against God at all? This moment showed that I had not. It vindicated me. And that idea of vindication is huge for us as Christians. If you believe in Jesus Christ, if you say that you are justified by your faith, that is that the ordeal that Jesus went through in your place has made you now innocent before God. That he who knew no sin became sin for us. Why? So that in him we might become the righteousness of God. 2 Corinthians chapter 5:21. So that's the idea that is being portrayed here. It is in many ways, it's a forerunner of a lot of New Testament theology that's taking place. And that absolutely knocked me back this week. I didn't expect to see that this week. But this is absolutely beautiful. You see that he has been lowered, he has been tried, he has been acquitted, he's been found innocent, he has humbled himself, and then now the king says, have him lifted up. That's ascension kind of language, folks. That's the kind of stuff that we read about in Acts chapter 1. That is the ascension that is being written about here. Well, I tested this out on my youngest son. I said, hey, what do you think about this? And I said, what is the first things that come through your mind? And Eli said, well, what I think about is the proverb that says, the one who digs a pit will fall in it. I was like, yeah, that's good theology. Okay. Point for Fike's team. Yep. Okay. He who lives by the sword will die by the sword. Jesus taught that. Yes. That's good. Okay. He said also, it seems that we are not supposed to judge others, or we will be judged by the same measure. Look at that second group of guys. Do not judge the Daniels or anyone else, lest you be judged, because the same measure that you dole out will be doled out to you. You'll get the same measuring stick. Because, why is that true? Because Jesus is our vindication. Jesus is the one who makes us righteous. A few weeks ago, I told a few of you of this young woman who didn't want to have an interview with me because she had read my newsletter. She'd asked, can I see a copy of your tattoo interview newsletter? And she said it was too overtly Christian, and so I don't want anything to do with you. And now at that moment, I'm hearing insult, may have been meant or not, doesn't matter, and I wanted to put you in Bill Fikes' mind insofar as it's safe to be so, okay? Part of what I want you to hear is how does a person who follows Jesus deal with that backhanded slap? Because what I want to do is, I want to tear into her or say something snarky more likely and then run away. But I kept saying to myself, Jesus Christ is my vindication. I don't have to prove myself any one way or another, so I simply said, well, I don't want you to feel uncomfortable in any of these interviews. And so that was the right thing to say. But I want you to see that this stuff isn't automatic. I mean, this kind of stuff, when it happens to us, the reason why we have fights and dissensions among us is because we don't take a beat. We don't breathe, and we don't say, okay, now, how does Jesus want me to respond? Because so often we're like, I don't care how Jesus wants me to respond. This is how I want to respond. But see, I don't have to justify myself to her. I don't have to justify myself to the culture that I live in, folks. That's how this applies for us. Right now we're living in a secular culture, and they're saying all sorts of things about us. Does that even really matter what they're saying? I'm not saying does it hurt or not? Because yes, it hurts. Yes, it offends us. But that's not the point. The point is that we don't have to be justified by this culture. We have to be faithful to God. That is what God is calling us to. God is our judge. So we must live to please Him.